everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Tris, and here, if you're new, we do a lot of fun little crafts, recipes, and book reviews of ancient or very old things that interest me from a historical perspective. And today we are going to be doing an illuminated letter. So what is illumination? Well, it is the art of decorating the first letter of a page or just in general, just a beautifully decorated letter, particularly with gold foil. Now, since I'm not made out of money, we're going to be using gold paint instead of gold foil today, but the craft's about the same. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do this particular craft as my very first craft is because it is actually the first sort of anachronistic craft that I got into myself. I was part of an illumination group for a while, and we would do calligraphy, and then we would decorate the borders and the edges of various pieces of our work, and it was really fun, and I think it's really pretty art. So the letter that I'm going to do today is T for Tris, and we are going to take a moment to reorient the camera so you guys can see my workspace, and I will show you how to get started. All right, so here I've assembled all the pieces for my project. You can see that I have a pad of specifically calligraphy paper. If you don't have access to calligraphy paper, you're going to want a thicker, more absorbent paper, such as like watercolor paper or some other paper that's going to not bleed when you paint on it, because the paints are going to go everywhere. I also use just a mechanical pencil for tracing. I made a stencil for my letter. I want some tiny, tiny, tiny brushes, as small as you can get. These ones are fine detail brushes, but if you cannot get any brush small enough, I've actually used a toothpick in the past, which will, especially if you soften the end, it'll help you to do very fine lines. But you're going to want to be careful with that when it comes to some of the paints, because it will clog up the paint and they won't work very smoothly. Next, I selected my colors. Now, of course, we have to use gold, because gold is pretty much what makes something an illuminated letter. It's got gold leaf, gold decoration. Although you can, in theory, not use gold if you don't like it. But I picked this particular shade, Dr. P.H. Martin's, and this one will have sort of a nice flash and shine to it, even though I'm not using gold leaf. Now, for the paints, for the remainder of our project, I wanted to use more natural colors that would have been available to people in the past, and colors that will look good together, obviously. So the colors that I chose were a sort of almost blue-green, so it's going to come out very vivid and striking. So I don't want the rest of the colors to be as striking, so I went with a more deep indigo. Now this one will certainly sort of pull like a negative space background coloring. And this, which is a sort of a clay red. So if you think of like a terracotta earthen red, this will be the red. It's not going to be a bright crimson red, but it is going to be a nice neutral color for sort of the background space of my piece. So the first thing we're going to do before we do anything else is that we're going to want to prep our page. So I already went ahead before this video and I traced out my letter T. So we're going to carefully remove the page. You can also do this in your book if you prefer, but just because the book can be a little awkward, I'm going to remove it from the page. So you're going to trace over your letter with your mechanical pencil. I made the lines a little darker than I usually like, only because I want them to be visible to you on the camera. So how I did this was I centered the T to make sure that it's going to be in the middle of the frame. When this is eventually finished, it will be matte with a nice frame around it and hung up on the wall, hopefully somewhere in here, so you can continue to enjoy it in future videos. So once you've got all that tracing done, we can proceed to the next step, which is going to also require a teeny tiny cup of water. So for this part of the process, we're going to want to make sure that we have sort of a vision for what this letter is going to look like. So I know I want to make gold the outline of my letter T, and I know that I want to do little decorative medallions in between the colors that I'm going to use with the gold. So the gold is going to be the last color that I apply. That means that I have to sort of think of what the process is going to be with my other colors. And because I want the green to pop, I'm going to use that as the accent part and the most noticeable pieces of the T, leaving the blue and the red as sort of background colors for me. Now, the paintbrush that I select is going to matter a great deal here, because if I pick something that's too thin, it's going to take a great deal of time for me to fill in those spaces. But if I pick something that's too thick, then I'm going to have big globs of paint, and I don't want that. So for this particular piece, I think that the brush with the appropriate size is actually going to be this one. So if you see this guy here, he's a little thick. But this one has that same flat bristles at about half the size. So this will be my good starting point. And because I want my green to pop, I'm going to start with that color. Now, something that might be new to you if you've never used calligraphy ink before is this dropper effect. Now, this is here in case you want to put the ink directly into a separate bowl. In this case, I don't think I'm going to do that, but that would be the most proper way to do it. And this will allow you to suck up the ink using this little ink dropper here. You would squeeze it, pull out the ink, and deposit it into whatever little bowl that you're working with. But because of the fact that today we're being a little bit more casual, I'm going to go directly out of the jar. So I'm going to set this aside for now. Though note that that is in fact a very valuable way to use these particular paints. Now, something to be aware of when working with ink, if you've never worked with it before, is that it's a lot runnier than your average paint. So if you've never worked with it before, you're definitely going to want to stir it. So I brought some bamboo stirrers out to sort of run through it. And ink will stain a lot. So make sure that when you're using it that you put everything down on a surface that won't stain. So I want to block off the areas that I'm going to be doing. And for my own sanity, I'm going to use a pencil. Now, the pencil will create a tiny line that can act as a stopgap and keep the ink from running all over the place. So in theory, we should get a nice shaping. So since I know I want to put gold around the edges here, I'm going to mark this area off. Again, this is a little darker than I would normally write because I want it to be visible to you in cyberspace. So it's going to be a little bit darker, but you want to make just a nice light line that'll show you where you're going to be drawing and making your marks. Now I want to put my little bowls here. 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 And then down here as well. And I probably would like to divide the center trunk up with some decorative bowls. Now these will probably make more sense when they're filled in. But for now, we have a sort of outline of where this guy is going. Great. Make sure you pat off any excess ink. As I said, this stuff runs like mad. So I like the idea of this piece being a bit of like the effect coming through with the paint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that all my strokes are going in the same direction. And I'm going to let them dry a little bit before I go and paint next to it. As you can see, there's quite a bit of movement of this paint. Again, if you're not used to working with ink, it runs very, very much. So keep that in mind and definitely make sure that your brush is clean. I can't stress that enough because if you have just too much ink, you're going to have a soggy, soggy mess. This line I think could be a little thicker. So as you can see, the minute I put more ink on it, it just went nuts. So if you ever get into a position like that, that's why I keep a towel handy. And you could just dab it with just the corner of the paper towel, and that'll absorb all the excess ink. So you won't have that problem of extra stuff marked and running all over your piece and ruining everything that you're trying to achieve. Just going to go back and make sure that all the strokes are going in the direction I want them to. We'll go back up here and we'll finish in this bit. Now, if you want to make a piece that isn't necessarily as reliant on the motion of the brush, that's okay too. And that will simply you just fill in this space all at once instead of coming back like I'm doing to create this layered effect. And I almost think there's too much here again, and that's why I got my paper towel and just soak up those darker spots. And smooth it back out again. So one of the things that I like most about using ink versus using paint is that the ink itself will create really interesting striations. So if you see how it's sort of got some whiter space in here, that's actually okay, and I like that. If you don't like that, you're going to want to make sure that you smooth out your paint as much as possible. But this gives it sort of an interesting effect, in my opinion. And I, for one, am going for that look today. Now, this is a personal preference, but it's certainly not something that every person who does this craft necessarily needs to do. But I prefer to finish one color completely before moving on to the next. Now, if you're doing a lot of little detail work, you may not be able to have that luxury and you may need to go back. But for me, that allows the colors to sort of tell me what they want to look like. And I can go back and fill in the missing pieces with different colors instead of focusing too much on an overall art piece. I'm not quite sure, for example, right now, of those pieces that I have left blank, which of them is going to be red and which of them is going to be blue. So once I have this green finished, we'll take a moment and we'll look at it and say, try to figure out what color wants to be what. So as you can see, since I left this piece to dry a little differently, it's definitely creating its own sort of lines, despite the fact that I'm painting next to it. And I like that because it gives it a striped effect, and I think that that stripe effect looks really, really cool. So you can make any letter that you find on any particular site. You can freehand draw. I'm not as good with the freehand drawing, so I prefer to use a stencil. But if you want to use a freehand, if you want a freehand draw, that's certainly also available as an option. And you're just going to want to make the letter big enough to fill in the space, but not completely. So if you see, I have a lot of blank space around the letter, and that's because that is going to be the focus of the frame. If I were making a medieval book, this letter would be right up against the writing in the book, or if I was writing this as a capital letter on a letter that I was writing to a friend or something, it would also be right up against it. So that would allow you to have not as much worry about blank space. But here we want to make the letter the focus of the frame, so we're going to put it right in the center. And a lot of these letters, when illuminated in the past, would have themes. So if you were writing a piece of the gospel, you would want to maybe have the the art around the letter reflect the gospel that you were writing. Or maybe you wanted to make sure that your readers were paying attention. And so you would write something about holiness and godliness, and then you would use a little demon off to the side, like he's trying to tempt you away from the holy words to try to distract your focus. And these little cheeky things that monks would do with illuminated letters are always fun. In some of the illuminated letters, considering the fact that they did not have the same stencils and things that we do today, and didn't have the same access to things, are pretty impressive. They would, of course, use their own versions of stencils and things, but they were not writing on paper. They were writing, for the most part, on vellum, which is a sort of processed animal skin. And those are very tricky, and you don't want to mess those up, especially because it takes a long time to prepare a piece of vellum. Just like it's taking me a very long time to clean this brush. So we will check back in a minute when my brush is completely clean. So that green was something else. It did not want to clean. So we did that. I just rinsed out the brush in the sink. And now I'm back. So I decided, I think I want to go with the neutral brown next, in the trunk of the T. So reestablishing our conversation about vellum. So these vellums would take a very long time to prepare, and they would be scraped. So all of the excess animal fats and things would be removed from it. And then once that was fully prepared, they'd be dusted and dried and ready for use in the scriptorium, which is the place where the monks would sit and write out the scriptures, or in the case of monks doing the illuminated letters, they would be painting. Now, most likely, if the monastery or location where these things were being done was big enough, our monks would not be doing the same job. Though, of course, if it was a smaller monastery, some of these things would be done start to finish by the same artist. I say monks because a good portion of the manuscripts that we have were done by illumination experts in monasteries. But certainly Christian monks were not a little bit outside my line there. Christian monks were not the only people making illuminated letters. In fact, some of the most impressive specimens we have were done by Muslim scholars. And these are done in a very similar fashion, and certainly are just as intricate of a process. I think some of the best places to see illuminated manuscripts are museums, because you can go and look at the actual books that these things were written in. They'll be on display. And the illuminated letter will certainly pop. It'll be the part of the book that you notice first. And some of these letters are incredibly intricate. So what I'm doing here today is honestly a very, very simple design. And a little bit more neutral in color and tone. But some of the artists you will see will use 5 or 6 different colors with so much filigree and precision that it'll blow your mind. And they are way more talented than I am. So we are going to not attempt to one up the medieval monks that spent hours every day, all day for their entire lives doing this work. And we're going to just simply allow ourselves to be modern historians and lovers of art who do our best with the minimal training that we have received. In case you're wondering what that little clinky noise is, it's actually my lantern. So it might be bothering me a bit. I think I'm going to take it off the table. It's a very pretty lantern, but it is very noisy. Yeah, that's a little better. So going around this corner, I lost some of my brush strokes, so I'm going to go back over again. And again, we have way too much on this brush, so we're going to have to do some dabbing. Again, don't despair if you find that that is the case and that your brush needs to be that you need to take some extra ink off. It happens to everyone. It's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to you after you've been doing illumination for 6 years. You're still going to suddenly be like, oh no, I used too much. So I really liked this banding effect that I have going on here. If you don't like it, again, just wet it and go from there, or just do everything together in one shot. Um, there are more elaborate letters that are sometimes formed of multiple pillars. So if I wanted to go so far as to detail this, going back over and putting in maybe some lines going down to make it look like a pillar, which actually, now that I'm doing that, I kind of like that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. But you can always add in detail work later once you get your vast bulk of your piece colored. And for this, I'm just using the edge of the brush to create some very fine lines. Only because this brown, I do like it. I think it's a very pretty color, but it is a little bit dull compared to some of the others. Now I'm going to pause and clean my brush again because that went really time consuming last time. We're back and we're going to start with the indigo, which I have to say this color is incredibly striking. It's very beautiful and very dark. So I'm excited to see what it looks like. I wanted to cap off the ends here with the blue, only because it's such a dark color. I didn't want it to take over all of my project. And since these are the little end pieces, I might actually switch to a thinner brush. So let's see if I want to get these bigger spots filled in with the blue first. That's such a beautiful color. So when you do these sort of smaller little strokes like this, it keeps the ink from creating those lines like I did before. Because I don't think I really want them with the blue. I think I want the blue to be a little bit less linear, a little more fluffy. A good way, by the way, to keep the ink from getting too thick on your brush is to take it from the side of the bottle instead of sticking your brush right down in the middle. Again, if you were putting this onto its own little tray, you would not have that problem as much, but taking it from the sides is still a very good way to keep it from getting too thick. Love that blue. It's a very beautiful blue. I'm going to turn this guy so I don't stick my hand directly in the project. Another thing that I think when you're starting out, ink can be very expensive. It can be up to about $10 a bottle. So depending on how many colors you want to use, that can get a bit pricey. But the good news is that these ink bottles last a very long time. You can see I'm using barely any of this for this project, and I could probably get a good dozen or so projects easily out of these bottles, and that's presuming that the color is used as the primary color. This blue, for example, I'm not going to use too much of it, so there's going to be a ton left in this bottle. So if you find that you really like calligraphy, then you will find that you will use these quite a bit. Now, the other benefit of the eyedropper that I didn't mention is if you are using calligraphy pens. So you might find you can buy pens which will allow you to have the pretty little nubs on the end that allow you to write the letters in scrolling scripts. If we're doing an illumination, not a calligraphy writing fully, but if we were to do that, you could get a pen with a refillable center, and those would be able to be refilled from the eyedropper. So you would just take some of the ink out, and then you would squirt it into your refillable chamber cartridge, and you could go ahead and start using your pen. So if calligraphy is something that is interesting to you, calligraphy, illumination, these kind of arts are something that you think you might want to pursue, the startup cost of the ink is going to last you a while. And you can always ask relatives for gift cards. I think Michael's and Joann's in the United States, I've had luck with getting ink from them in the past. I think the ink I currently have actually came from Joann's. And you can always find things on specialty websites as well, and on independent artist sites. People make their own ink, and some of it is really very, very striking and beautiful. So now that I see this out, I'm a little taken aback by how dark the corners are with the T here. So I might actually take these center bits and instead of making them gold, make them blue. But I want to see what happens when I put the gold into the picture. So the gold is a piece de resistance, if you will. Sorry again for my terrible accent. I am not good at the accent thing. I really probably should stop before I offend literally every human being who speaks languages in this world. Especially English. Really bad with that one. My native language. My goodness. I'm going to clean this brush and check back in with you guys. So my gold can only be described as having gotten lumpy, and not in a good way. I don't know how you could be good and lumpy, but it certainly was. It certainly was not. It wasn't good. So that took me a little while to mix it up so it wasn't quite so condensed at the bottom. I've noticed with the metallic paints that tends to be more of a problem with sediment at the bottom than in other paints, but you know, the gold is really worth it. So I'm gonna get way too much on this brush here for a second so I can show you the sheen here. So if you look how much that just pops. Here you go on there. So I have a more coppery gold, so it's a deeper gold. You can use you can find very light golds. You can find all sorts of silvers and coppers as well. So this one I think works for the piece that I'm trying to make. So we're going to start on the edges here, and we're going to fill in these little bowls that I need, and we're going to make little gold rondels, rounded little gems here in this space. And those will sort of catch the eye and make this piece really, truly stand out. So in this case, I am a little disappointed with my terracotta red. I was hoping that this would be a little less coppery, but I think ultimately it's still gonna work nicely with my little pop of color here. Now, if you notice, this is where you can be a little bit more adventurous. So I'm going outside the lines, if you will. I'm coloring outside the lines because this way I will get a nice full effect on my corners, make them look bejeweled, bedazzled, just all around gorgeous. There's something very Byzantine about this. If you saw my video last week, I love Byzantine art, and so this is very pleasing to me. I like the sort of gold um, shimmer here with the bejeweled green. However, I'm not, as I said, I'm not as pleased with the terracotta. I think that I won't be pairing it with this gold in the future. But we live, we learn, and we create interesting art. Here again, if you used a pencil to sketch things out, you're going to want to make sure you put down enough layers to cover the pencil so it's not visible anymore. So yeah, I do have an idea for what I might want to do with these little gold rondels to make them pop a little bit more than they already are. It's going to involve our good friend Blue over there. Let's get these guys done first. now we've got the overall part filled in, we can begin to trace the edge because I want the gold to make this letter really pop. And then once that's done and everything is dry, I will give a last minute attempt at my idea with the blue, which I'm thinking they look very nice actually. Ooh, wow, okay, that came out very coppery over here in the corner. Just bring that into my roundel there. And ultimately at the end of the day, these pieces are going to be unique and they're going to have little details in them that are uniquely yours, your mistakes, your triumphs. And I think that's what makes them so interesting. So if you ever want to make like a card for a friend for their birthday, or just a monogram for yourself, if you ever want to make yourself some cute wall art, you can write the first letter of a word from a for you know in this you write like a quote from your favorite book, put that on your wall. You can always use this illumination technique. Goodness, that's really dark. To make it really shine. And again, no one is perfect with this. You could do this 20 years and make very beautiful letters, and then you could not. So don't be too hard on yourself, and don't expect perfection the first time you do this either. Like there's um also don't be surprised if you nail it the first time out of the gate too. I mean, it's all about what you're going for in your look, what makes you happy. If you love it, then it's exactly what you wanted. No one needs to know otherwise. I don't have that luxury today because you're following me along, and so that I'm not pleased with this brown and this blue, so I can't pretend that I'm not. That's what I always wanted. No, it's actually drying nicely, though, I will say. And I do like the effect I got here in the corners with the blue, so that was the right choice for the corners. If I could go back, I might have done just the blue and the terracotta, or just the blue and the green, and nixed the terracotta entirely. Um, because it is going a little too close to the gold color that I wanted. And see, again, here we go. We have a nice dark patch. I'm going to spread this out a little bit better. If you want to use other paints, you can. You can use acrylics, you can use watercolor. Watercolor, like ink, is going to run, so keep that in mind when selecting your paper. But any kind of paint that you feel comfortable with, you can use that too. I like ink specifically because I like the effects that it gives. I think it gives a really neat runoff effect that you can't get from acrylic paint. But if you like the flatter tone of acrylics, again, it's your piece. No one can tell you. No one can tell you you're wrong. Okay, so we're going to let this dry for a few minutes, and then I'm going to come back and check in again and see if my little trick with the blue is going to work nicely. Alright, so it's dry, and now we're going to try something a little interesting. We're going to add some layers to our ink here. I am going to try taking just the tiniest dot of the blue and adding it in the center of some of these little gold rondels here. And we may not like it, but again, it's part of the process. We live, we learn. We do the project a second time, or eighth time, or something. I actually really like this. I think this is kind of cute. Okay, I really like that. I like the slightly, almost like, again, bejeweled aspect of it. I'm going to turn it again. Now these are very, very thick globs of ink, so it's going to take a little while for it to dry. But, that'll be worth it, I think, for the little effect. I think it breaks up the monotony there of the terracotta quite a bit. I particularly like it here on the edges with the larger pieces. I think that looks really good. And yeah, all right. I think we like it. And there we have it. That's Illumination. I'm going to show you guys the finished product now that it has dried, and you can see a little bit better the flash in the camera. It's not lying straight down on looking straight on top of it. And I'm actually pretty satisfied with it at the end of the day. I was a little worried there for a while. You were there. But I wanted to point out one other feature that I didn't mention about calligraphy paper, and I don't know if you can see it very well in the camera, but there are these little lines that you can see going here, and they help you to center your piece and help you to sort of envision where things should go. But also, if you're using them for writing and you turn the page on the side, they act like the lines you would have in a notebook and help you to keep your calligraphy straight. So I think that's pretty cool. But obviously, we wanted to use it more for the absorbent quality than anything else. But again, if you don't have access to calligraphy paper, watercolor paper works really well for that. And there you have it. So I hope that you enjoyed this. This was really fun to make. I lost my way for a moment, but I really like the outcome. And I'm going to frame it, and we're going to put it somewhere back there. So at some point, it'll be in one of my videos. And this is the end of March, end of my first month of videos. And hopefully, if you are joining me for the first time, this was fun. And if you liked it, be sure to subscribe, click the bell to be notified of any future videos. And I've got some fun things planned for April because it's April Fools, and we're going to be a little sneaky next month. We're going to play with some tricksters and some silly things. And I have plans to do my first recipe video as well, and that'll be kind of fun. And so stick around and hope to see you in the next one.